Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome today to the program Finding Me on the ITV networks with my very special guest, Professor Ramon Grosfoguel. Professor Ramon Grosfoguel is an associate professor at UC Berkeley in the Department of Ethnic Studies, and he's also focusing on Latino and Chicano studies, but very well known recently for his work on decoloniality, decolonialism, and Islamophobia. So with that, I'm here today at the UNISA grounds, and I would like to welcome Professor and say thank you very much, Professor, for being here and for sharing this time.
Salam alaikum. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Professor. I think we're in a very dynamic moment in South Africa. So I want to bring in two things. One, I want to bring in this whole roads must fall and link it to the whole idea of epistemicide of knowledge. And then, of course, I want to bring it to your whole understanding of the Western universities. And the second part I would like to bring to the discussion what we've recently experienced is the Paris attacks. And so the whole notion of Islamophobia and the discussion on ISIS, and then we'll take it a little further. But for the benefit of the audience, Professor, you focus a lot on decolonialism and decoloniality and decolonial studies. Now, what is decolonialism, and why is it necessary to have decolonialism when people will tell you, but colonialism is over?
Well, the problem is that we need to think of colonialism and colonial relations not so much as an event, but as an era, as an epochal period, okay? So there are structures of power that were put forward through the European colonial expansion, through colonialism, that created global structures that are still with us, even though colonial administrations has been mostly eliminated in most of the world, okay? Most of the world is being eliminated. But the structures of power put forward by 450 years of European colonial expansion haven't been decolonized after the ending of colonialism as a colonial administration, or apartheid, okay, as a form of colonial administration. You still have the continuities of those colonial structures of power coming into the present, despite the fact that colonial administrations are over. So one of the greatest myths of the 20th century is to think that because colonial administrations were defeated in most of the world, that colonial relations are over. This is a mythology. In fact, we're still living in a pretty much colonial world, but the worst of the situation is that it's described and pretend to be post-colonial. So the post for me is a problematic term, because in fact, there's no post to coloniality. When you think about, for example, the structures of exploitation and domination at the level of capitalist accumulation and the division of labor of the world, north-south, core periphery, we're still in relations of domination and exploitation from the old colonial powers to the old colonies. But in a world or in a moment where we today think of ourselves as if we were formally independent and independent from the Western power. In fact, we are not. As Kwame Nkrumah has described it very well, we're still living under neocolonialism, new forms of coloniality, through which the global North keep exploiting and dominating the global South. So this is one example. Another example is the structure of political authority. We're still using as a form of political authority this fiction called the nation state. And the nation state is another problem, because the moment you think that the identity of a state will correspond one-to-one to the identity of a population, you have there the seeds for genocide, extermination, all kind of problems, because there's no way you can have this. That doesn't exist as a fiction, not even in the quintessential example of nation state, which is France. Look at the problems they're having there, because they don't know what to do with difference. Why? Because they're still under the paradigm of nation state. One state okay, with one identity and one population with the same identity. That doesn't exist anywhere. So that's why indigenous people in the Americas have been pushing for constitutional transformations that were successful in Bolivia and Ecuador, calling for plurinational societies to move away from the structure of nation state. Recognition, we are different nations coexisting under one state, and therefore what we need to do is to talk in a horizontal way, one to each other, to construct then an intercultural state that recognizes that this is not a nation state but a plurinational state. And that requires the recognition of epistemic diversity. That is, how are we going to then think about democracy, taking into consideration the epistemic diversity of the country? Okay, so how are we going to think about economy? How are we going to think about citizenship? This is a challenge, and we need to move beyond these structures. Otherwise, we're still caught in the colonial imitation of the global north, and the nation state in Africa, for example, have created more problems than solutions. It just creates civil war in many parts of Africa have to do with this structure, arbitrary lines put by the colonizers, you know, in terms of this is Senegal, that is, this other country, Angola, that is, and by arbitrary divisions like that they did with a cake in Berlin in the 19th century, they split the whole continent into this fictional notion of nation state where you have 20, 25, 30, 50 different ethnicities that then the colonizers privilege one, and these are the ones running the nation state and oppressing everybody else. And so what I'm saying is not only that, epistemic structures. The epistemic structures are still colonial because we're still privileging Western man as the only source of critical knowledge in universities, in every field of life. So I'm giving you this example just to show you how colonialism is not over.
For the benefit of the audience, when you speak of epistemic or epistemic structures, etc., what exactly are you referring?
Well, I mean the structures of knowledge. Structure of knowledge. You go to a university, that I prefer to call it westernized university rather than university, because when you go to that university, what you're reading is Western males of 5 countries. You're reading French, Germans, British, Americans, and on the side, Italians. That's what you read. You go to sociology, you go to anthropology, you go to all these disciplines. What you're reading is Western males of 5 countries. And this, I have a long thing, lecture on that I just gave here in the summer school, the colonial summer school, that I cannot repeat here. But this privilege of Western men in knowledge production have to do with 4 genocides, epistemicides of the long 16th century. During the period between 1450 and 1650, they built their privilege by practicing genocide, destruction of people, and epistemicide, destruction of their knowledge, in the conquest of Andalusia, south of Spain, against the Muslims and Jews, in the conquest of the Americas against indigenous people, in the conquest of Africa, and then their massive kidnapping of Africans in the captive trade to be brought to the Americas and enslave them there, and in the massive killing of women in Europe accused of being witches and burned alive. So if you look at the conquest of women in Europe, the conquest of Africa, conquest of the America, the conquest of Al-Andalus, they not only kill people, but they kill their knowledge by burning their libraries. And burning libraries and destroying their knowledge is part of inferiorizing their knowledge. So by the time you have modern philosophy and the modern westernized university, they privilege their Western males. Why? Isn't there other knowledge elsewhere? There are many critical knowledge produced elsewhere, but they inferiorize it. That's why I call it epistemic racism, sexism. The structures of knowledge of the Western university practice epistemic apartheid. You cannot destroy apartheid by just destroying the juridical institution. You still have epistemic apartheid in the university. You're still living under apartheid. You need to go beyond apartheid. That's why I like the movement in South Africa calling for to decolonize the university, because apartheid is not going to be finished until you have not only finishing economic apartheid, which is still here with us, but also epistemic apartheid. Structures of knowledge in the university keeps out of the fences of the university knowledges that come from other places of the world, including Africa and South Africa. You still have the Western men monopolizing what is truth, what is reality, and what is good for you. And they do that because by monopolizing knowledge and claiming that their knowledge is scientific and superior, etc., they're able then to legitimate policies, okay, at the level of the state and at the level of the society that are going to be oppressive.
Now, speaking about that and speaking about the fact that this westernized universities are creating these forms of domination, and we're going to a break so very quickly, although we are not condoning the violence and we're not glorifying the violence, but if you look at the history, for example, of Boko Haram, which loosely translated it means against Western knowledge, is this a form of decoloniality, of decolonizing, to say that we want nothing to do with the system of knowledge? You know, if you look at the geopolitics of the way in which the organization also...
I will, the answer to that is that to be decolonial doesn't mean to be anti-Western. To be decolonial means that we're going to bring epistemic diversity to every problem at the level of knowledge. I'm talking at the level of knowledge. To decolonize the university, we need to bring epistemic diversity to everything we are studying. Okay, instead of dividing knowledge in disciplines the way the West are doing,
yes,
you know,
yes,
since the 19th century,
like sociology, politics,
sociology, political science, and dividing knowledge like that. We should be thinking in terms of problems that humanity faces, not in terms of problems of disciplines, which is a decadent knowledge. You know, it's decadent to think that way. So the problem is that we need epistemic diversity. If you just, that means we have to decenter the West, but to decenter the West doesn't mean to throw away what the West can contribute. What we need to do is to decolonize knowledge by bringing, okay, if we're talking about the ecological disaster of the planet, okay, let's look how the Aymara people, indigenous people in America think about it. Let's look about how Muslims think about it. Let's look about how people in South Africa, black people in South Africa think about it. And then let's look how the white Western critical thinkers think about it as one more in the conversation, not at the center. And then we enrich our knowledge, and instead of creating universalism, we create pluriversalisms, which means a pluriverse where we bring it's a universal rich in multiple particularities. So instead, the anti of Boko Haram falls into the traps of inverting the binaries of the West. And that, I'll come back to that after the break.
Okay, so thank you. We'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Finding Me, the second segment today at the ITV Networks with Professor Ramon Grosfoguel. Before we went into the break, Professor was explaining to us about decolonialism and the Boko Haram and how they invert the whole concept. So, Professor, maybe you can just take that a little further.
To be decolonial doesn't mean to be anti-Western. It means to be anti-Eurocentric. To be anti-Eurocentric doesn't mean that you're anti-European, okay? It means that you are not going to center knowledge anymore in one specific genealogy of thought. That we're going to bring epistemic diversity of critical knowledge produced from everywhere else. Part of what happens is that we are living social and historical realities very different from the social historical realities where Western men produce their knowledge. And if we import their concepts to the context of South Africa or Latin America, other places, where these authors have never thought our social historical conditions, we are going to fall into a kind of mental colonialism from the left, because we're bringing categories, supposedly critical categories produced from elsewhere, that these authors never thought what it means to be a racialized subject, for example, inferior. They never thought about it. They never thought what it means to be colonized. They never thought what it means to be a neo-colony. They never thought to be in an economy that is completely dominated by someone else from elsewhere. You know, they never thought about this. So they don't have the critical categories that we can learn from. But there are other authors in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia that have thought about it. So we can begin a different conversation. And of course, we're not going to reject some of the good things we can learn from this Western tradition of thought, but it's not anymore the center.
It's not one the only more. Knowledge.
It's one more. And that, in that way, I think that decolonization of knowledge cannot be, and to become, we're anti-Eurocentric, but not anti-European. So what happened with Boko Haram and many of the Islamic fundamentalism is that what they do, and not only Islamic fundamentalism, third world fundamentalism in general, because you can see also some kind of indigenous fundamentalism, some kind of also third world fundamentalism in the sense of some Afrocentric fundamentalism, okay? Which are a minority always among the Afrocentric. It's a minority among the indigenous, it's a minority among the Muslims, but the West loves to exaggerate them, to make you believe that if you think from a different epistemology, you're already fundamentalist. This is a problem, okay? Because you could think from another epistemology without being a fundamentalist, okay? For me, a fundamentalist is anybody who thinks of their knowledge as superior and practice epistemic racism towards the rest. And the most dangerous form of fundamentalism in the world today is Eurocentrism. Because they're the ones that have the power, economic, political, military, to impose their knowledge around the world, okay, and inferiorize everybody else. So we have this structure called the Westernized University that practice epistemicide everywhere they go. If you go to a classroom in any university, Western university in South Africa or in Brazil or in India, and you enter the room, you read the same guys. From the same,
and the only guys.
And the only guys in town. You don't read anybody else, okay? So it's males of 5 countries, okay? You read a French, you read the name changed, but the nationalities are the same. So you read a French, a British, you read an American, or you read a German, or you read an Italian, okay? And the problem is that this was created through this genocide episteme I mentioned that are buried in the memory of history. That's how they build a privilege in knowledge. But the other problem is that this is provincial knowledge disguised as universal. That is, we are going to then use their concept that were produced to a different reality to try to understand through their lenses our reality. That's colonialism. We need to move beyond this, yeah. You know, and to create new structures of knowledge. But the solution to that cannot be now to reject in block what the other side, what they contributed, okay? So if you do that, you fall into the binaries of the West. A lot of the fundamentalists, what they do is they invert the binary. The West imposed a binary through colonialism around the world, and still today. They made you believe that science is naturally inherently European, obscurantism is naturally inherently non-European, okay? They made you believe that women liberation is naturally inherently European, woman oppression is Islamic, is African, is non-European. Okay? They made you believe that liberty, freedom, democracy is naturally inherently European, and despotism, authoritarianism is naturally inherently non-European. These are binaries, false binaries, that the Eurocentric thought has been very successful as make us believe around the world these fairy tales. Okay? But here comes the fundamentalists. And they take the binary, and instead of showing how there are concepts of democracy, concepts of women liberation, concepts of freedom in all the cultures, okay, what they do is, oh yes, they invert the binary and say, yes, we are for patriarchy. So what? We are superior to you. We are for despotic regimes. So what? We are superior to you. And they just accept the binary, and the only thing they do is like this. That's a form of Eurocentrism. Third world fundamentalism, including Islamic fundamentalism, is a variation of Eurocentrism.
Thinking like the colonialists. Huh? Thinking like the colonialists.
Yes,
with the colonialist mind.
They're accepting the binaries of the colonialists, of white supremacist epistemology, you see, and just inverting it. They're not displacing it. They're not questioning the binary. They're not showing how it's a false binary. How it's not true that democracy, freedom, women liberation, etc. is naturally inherent in European. That's not true. It's being in all the culture, you can find women structures and knowledge and culture that are naturally inherent in European. That's not true. It's being in all the culture, you can find women structures and knowledge and culture that are naturally inherent in European. That's not true. It's being in all the culture, you can find women structures and knowledge and culture that are naturally inherent in European. That's not true. It's being in all the culture, you can find women structures and knowledge and and ideas of woman liberation, democracy, freedom, all of that. You can find it everywhere. And practice and institutional practices about it, okay? You could find it everywhere. But if you accept the binary, then you do only like this to fight the West. You're still inside the West. You're still trapped inside the West, inside the binaries of the West, in the name of being anti-Western. And that's why I see all these fundamentalists, third world fundamentalists, variation of Eurocentrism. And that's why I'm saying that Eurocentrism is the worst form of fundamentalism, because not only they are the ones producing economically, military, financially, and politically the Islamic fundamentalists and all these different groups that today become very violent groups. You cannot understand Al-Qaeda without the CIA. You cannot understand ISIS, and you cannot understand today Al-Qaeda in Syria without understanding the Zionist, Saudi, CIA alliance there. Okay, you cannot understand Boko Haram without the Saudis and without the CIA and without the Nigerian state itself. Okay, so you need to understand all these things, that these are created precisely with global colonial designs put there for very particular purposes. They use this so-called jihadist movement, the Takfiris, either to topple a government they don't like, or to intervene militarily in a place they want to intervene. One of the two. And that's how they do it. And they use now the jihadists to do this. And these jihadists, in fact, are like mercenaries. People who are poor, in very bad condition. Here come the Saudis, here come the CIA, here come the Zionists, through covert operations, and give them money, give them resources. And suddenly you have bandits, people who are in a very dispossessed situation, okay, now using whatever identity, as long as you pay them, to do any kind of atrocity. And they're mobilized to destroy governments they don't like, the West doesn't like. They mobilize to justify military intervention in places they want the raw material, and so on. You know, so this is a trap that is put on us today to think as if this is some kind of authentic Islam, when in fact all of this is Wahhabism, okay? And Wahhabism was, you cannot understand Wahhabism, it's a 200-year creation. It's not coming from ancient Islamic civilization. It was never recognized by the Sunnis, not to talk about the Shias, about as an authentic form of Islam. It was never. It's only in the 20th century through petrodollars, you know, oil dollars, that they be able to put money all over the world with their propaganda.
And the binaries.
And, you know, and the binaries of the West, you know, that have managed to succeed in creating all these fundamentalist forms all over the place, with the consent of the Americans and the British. Remember, the Wahhabis were used by the British against the Ottomans.
Yes.
And later they found oil there, and then of course they were part of the project of the West, and the Saudi have always been with the West, on bet with the West, in colonial imperial enterprises all over the place, okay? From way back, okay? 200 years ago. And you can understand the ways of reading the Quran, okay, of the Wahhabis and all these fundamentalist groups, which is a literalist reading, without understanding the methods of reading the Bible of the Christian Protestant fundamentalist sects.
So they read the same way.
They use the same methods.
Literally.
I mean, it's just, and then to make us believe that this is some kind of authentic Islam, you know, and that we are now, is Muslim people doing all these atrocities. No, wait a minute. Don't fool me with those, you know, crazy narratives, okay? And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to fool you into some kind of idea. These are some crazy people there, you see, to justify political imperialist interventions, you see, in many parts of the world. That's what they're doing. And the jihadists is the excuse they use, either to topple a government or to justify intervention. So what happens is that the binaries, they produce them militarily and economically, Eurocentric fundamentally, but they also produce them epistemically. Because epistemically, in structural knowledge, they're just inverting the binary that the West has imposed through colonialism.
So we're coming to the end of this interview, and so very quickly, just to link that, do you think that it was possible that they're able to do that, firstly because they destroyed intellectual Islamic thought with the destruction of the library, for example, in Spain, the libraries in Spain and all of that knowledge, and so created the Saudi Wahhabism as the only authentic knowledge of Islam, the same as where the Europeans created their only knowledge as the authentic way of, so it's a same operating principle.
Absolutely, because what they did is that through colonialism, they destroy the infrastructure of knowledge production of Islamic civilization, you see?
Right.
And then it was in a disarray, the infrastructure. Remember, Islamic civilization was more developed than the Europeans at the level of science, knowledge, technology, you name it. A lot of the modern science are extractivist appropriations that Europeans did over Muslim civilization. Because what they did was they appropriated their knowledge and then erased the memory of the history where they got that knowledge. And today we celebrate Copernicus, but we forgot that Copernicus plagiarized the school of Baghdad that 600 years before had discovered that the Earth is not the center of the universe, it goes around the sun. I mean, but then we celebrate Copernicus, the white man, and we forgot that he got it from the Arab Muslims in Baghdad 600 years before had made the demonstration. You know, and here is the book of George Saliba that I recommend on this question, demonstrating this.
What is the title of the book, Professor, before we go to the end?
It's called About Islamic Science and the Making of the Renaissance, something like that.
Okay, so we have to end it here. We're going to come back with another interview, but for that, I think you've really whet the appetite of the audience, and I'd like to say thank you very much. So till we come back, fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.